Hello, I have injured my back recently, and as such, you will be getting me sitting down on a chair today. So, Hollow Knight, pretty good game, 9 out of 10. What do you want me to say? It's Hollow Knight. It baffles my mind that this game was made by three people. Just three people made this game. It's incredible. The atmosphere is amazing. Like they went with the Dark Souls theme of the. Okay, I should start with my experience of the game. The first time I tried to play this, I got the game within a year of it releasing. I think I got the game for the first time back in 2018. I tried to play it. I got through the Forgotten Crossroads, got to the the second boss of the False Champion. And then I made it to Green Path and I kind of dropped the game after that. And it's not so much of I wasn't having fun and I dropped the game, it was so much more of I stopped playing for the night and then forgot to pick the game back up again. And then the second time I tried to play it, I thought that if I tried to stream the game on Twitch, maybe that would give me a little kick in the butt enough to finish the game this time. And I streamed it for 4 hours. Again, got to Green Path. This time I actually got to the Hornet fight and fought Hornet. And then again, after the same thing happened, after the 4 hours, I stopped playing for the night and then completely forgot to pick the game up again after that. So, with this YouTube channel, I decided I was going to stream the game on the YouTube channel. Again, try and stream and try and force me to beat the game. And this time, it actually managed to work. If you're interested, I streamed the entire game. It's on my YouTube channel under the live section. It has all of the VODs there. If you want to go check that out, if you feel like it. It shouldn't be too long. I think each stream is about 3 to 4 hours, and there's like four of them. So if you just want something to put on in the background, there it is. So I beat the game this time. This time I actually managed to beat the game. It was a lot bigger than I thought it actually was. This silly little bug game is has an incredible. So when I talked in my Elden Ring game, in my Elden Ring video, I mentioned how I thought Elden Ring was an 8 out of 10 game because Elden Ring is a fantastic game, but its scope is too big. They try to do too much, they tried to make the world too massive, and because of that, some things were left a little lacking. Because of that, I could give it a score higher than 8, 8.5. However, with Hollow Knight, it is under the same vein as Elden Ring, in my opinion, where the mechanics are just spot on. Just everything is so tight and so well. It feels incredible just playing the game. Like combat in this game, anytime I messed up in combat and I died, I took damage, I died, any of that kind of stuff, I always knew it was my fault for either not being good enough or making a mistake or forgetting about something or not paying attention to something. It always felt like I was at fault for making a mistake most of the time. And because of that, it just felt so good whenever I beat a hard enemy because I knew that that was me. I accomplished that feat, and that is something I cannot praise this game enough for. Is throughout the entirety of the game, there's like a few like tutorial things like press this button to attack, press this button to jump, but they don't teach you they don't tell you the ins and outs of the game. You learn that stuff by playing the game. And I love it when games do that. The reason I give Hollow Knight a better score than Elden Ring, I give Hollow Knight 9, 9.5 out of 10, Elden Ring 8, 8.5, is because while the game is mechanically, I'd say just as good as Elden Ring, its scope is smaller. Team Cherry, the devs for Hollow Knight, tried to do less with their game than FromSoft tried to do with Elden Ring. And so because their scope was smaller and they tried to do less things, there's less chance for them to mess up. So they don't have any areas where the gameplay feels lacking or the enemy variety feels lacking. Like with Elden Ring and the Mountaintop of the Giants, something just feels off about that. It's not as polished as the rest of the game. There's not really any areas like that in Hollow Knight. So Hollow Knight, by that metric, Hollow Knight scores better. I would score Hollow Knight better than Elden Ring. So that's a fantastic 9.5 out of 10 game. Even though I hate out of 10 scales for ranking video games because it all depends on your taste and what kind of gameplay you like. For me, it's a 9.5 out of 10. So let's talk about my experience playing Hollow Knight then. Because the on-stream recording was not my first time playing it. I went into the game, I didn't know what to expect. Because by this point, I was playing the game in 2023. So I had heard endlessly how this game is fantastic. It is amazing. And I was just like, all right, fine. I'll finally play it. And boy, howdy, am I glad that I did. Because as I said, the gameplay is so good. Most of the bosses are amazingly designed, fantastically balanced, and get progressively more difficult, not through bullshit means like dealing more damage or just being an absolute damage sponge, but by changing up their attack patterns. What this kind of boss attacks slowly, this kind of boss attacks quickly. This boss just bum rushes you. The variety in bosses is amazing. There's hardly any reused bosses. And when a boss is reused, it's for the Dream Nail DLC, the DLC with all the dream stuff, with like the warriors and things, and they're reused because you're going into their mindscape and fighting their peak, I don't know, like perception of themselves. So like you fight the Soul Master in the Soul Sanctum, and then you use the Dream Nail to fight the Soul Tyrant, which is the exact same boss, but he's harder, but in a good way. Because the way they made him harder was make hitboxes for certain attacks larger, and they made certain attacks create more projectiles, and they made him faster. Making a boss faster, to an extent, is what I believe is the best way to make a boss that is being reused more difficult in a fun way. Because you've beaten this boss before, you know how this boss works, so now apply that at a faster pace. And I love it for that. Same thing with one of my favorite bosses, Dung Defender, and you fight him in his Dreamscape as the White Defender. He has, not only is he faster and some of his attacks have bigger hitboxes, but he also adds new attacks. And I just love it. There are some misses. Most of them are I can't remember what they're called. They're like the warrior souls things. Like Gorb and the dude with the sides and fucking Markoth. I'm not the biggest fan of those bosses. Particularly, I have a disdain for Marmu because Marmu ended my first ever Steel Soul mode run. I have a disdain for Marmu, and Markoth is the bane of my existence in the Godhome DLC. I am sorry about that. I forgot to hit record on the mic. Anywho, yeah, so I want to kind of talk about some of the areas in Hollow Knight. Like, I love how the areas have like different kind of like themes about them. So like you have the areas that are, so obviously the story is you're in the fallen kingdom of Hallownest. Hallownest fell some years ago to an infection, and you've come back. You are a shade that was a shade? A shade? You're a knight that was created by
the Pale King was trying to create the Hollow Knight to contain the infection, yada yada. Anywho, some of the areas, I really like the areas that still feel alive, even though the kingdom has fallen, and some of them are even thriving after the fall of the kingdom. Like Green Path and the Queen's Gardens and the Fungal Wastes. They all feel like they've not only survived the fall of Hallownest, but started thriving after it fell without the intervention of any of the bugs from Hallownest. And then you have places that are like an ancient structures that have fallen to ruin with no one to tend to them, like the Forgotten Crossroads in the City of Tears. And then you have the Ancient Basin, which I was absolutely terrified of the first time I went there because it had just those worm centipede things crawling around and making noises. It was like, I hate it here. And then you could see the void coming up from the ground. Is it the Ancient Basin? Or is Ancient Basin the one below? Because like I'm talking about the area where the castle is, the actual like where the Pale Palace used to be. The Ancient Basin might be the place below that where the void is coming from. Maybe. You've got probably my favorite area is Crystal Peaks, just for how it looks with all these pink crystalline structures all over the place. And it's overgrowing with these crystals, and it feels like the crystals are alive and actively growing through this place, which they're probably not. That's just me like loving the idea of a living crystalline organism. And then you get places like Kingdom's Edge, and the Resting Grounds, which just have this somber tone to them. And I love them all. There's not a location in Hallownest that I hate, except for maybe the sewers, because of that sound when you're walking around is fucking disgusting. It has the most disgusting, vile enemies I've seen, and I hate all of them. I might also kind of dislike Deep Nest, but that's because I'm a scared little bitch, and I hate it when games restrict your vision. I don't like darkness, and I don't like giant spiders. But they're bad for a good reason, because that's what they're going for, is a creepy place with spiders and darkness, and you gotta just try and survive to get to the dreamer that's in this place. And of course, what would a Metroidvania be without the upgrades? And the upgrades you get are all fantastic, because some of them are purely movement. Like the dash and the wings are purely movement, but they have uses in combat as well. And then you get other upgrade things that also help in combat, like the dash again, I guess, if you get the right charms. So if you get like Shadow Dash and then put Sharp Shadow on, Shadow Dashing through an enemy deals damage to them, which was my favorite charm to use after I got it. And then there's also Descending Dive that you get, Desolate Dive I think it's called, where it's a traversal ability where you can crash through the ground and open up new pathways, but it's also a damaging spell you can use against enemies, and it does a lot of damage. I played through the entire game rarely ever using the spells, which I regret doing now, because using the spells makes it so much more fun, and they also do so much more damage than just the nail alone. So I wish I had known that before I beat the game, but that it is what it is. That's whatever. It's all so good. I'm just gushing about the game at this point, just going from point to point, just talking about the things I love. But one of the things I love the most, and one of the things I'm very particular about when it comes to games, is the audio and the music. All the audio for the game is good, except for the sewers, because I hate the squishing sound it makes when you walk around. But like hitting enemies with the nails has good feedback. The whole thing with audio is audio on attacks needs to give you good feedback, let you know what's a hit and what's a miss, and it needs to convey the feeling of a hit to you. So it's very good when a hit is just a sound, and then not a hit. A miss is just a sound when you're just swinging your nail in the air, and then hitting an enemy has an immediate stimulus. And like the sound it makes, you immediately know I have hit the enemy. So that is fantastic sound design. But when it comes to the music, these three guys at Team Cherry went up to Christopher Larkin and was like, hey, we've got this cute little bug game that we'd like you to make music for. And Christopher Larkin went, I got you. The boss, all of this music for this game is amazing. All of the music for the individual area, each individual area has its own music, and it's so fitting for each area. The Forgotten Crossroads gives you has like this mysterious feel to it, like you're just, and like a beginning. It sounds like you're just beginning your adventure, because you are. It's like hopeful, but also kind of dour, and oh, I love it. And then Green Path and Queen's Gardens feel alive and vibrant. Fog Canyon feels muted and muggy. And then the Resting Grounds has the sound effect for the Dream Nail in the music. And then you go to the City of Tears, sounds dour and depressing. And it all fits so well. And then there's the action music when you get into combat and get into boss fights, and it's uplifting and peppy, and like some kind of epic tale is going on. And then you get the boss specific musics that are just curated perfectly for the boss fights. And I just, my favorite soundtrack from the game, my favorite piece of music from the game comes from the Grim Troop DLC. So Team Cherry made 4 free DLCs for the game. There was one that was about Lifeblood. I think it added a couple charms. There was one with the Dream Nail, added a couple charms, and also the dream fights against some of the bosses. There was the Grim Troop, and then Godhome. Grim Troop added an entirely new quest line involving the Grim Troop, and has one of the best designed characters I have ever seen in a game. And I'm not a furry, or whatever the fuck it'd be called in this instance, but I understand why the internet thirsts over Grimm so goddamn much. My favorite piece of music comes from the Grim Troop DLC, and it is the fight, I believe it's the first fight against Troop Master Grimm. And I love this because the music has like a carnival feel with some Victorian style kind of like vampiric tale music thrown in there, and it is also the only instance of an electric guitar in the entire game, in the entire soundtrack, and I love it for that, because when that guitar kicks in while I'm fighting Troop Master Grimm, I am having a fantastic time. I am loving every second of it. Alright, so I'm gonna get into some major spoilers here. I probably should have talked about giving a spoiler warning at the start, but the game came out in 2017, and if you haven't played it yet, I don't know what you're doing. I don't know what I was doing before I played it, but I don't know what you're doing if you haven't played it yet. So, spoiler alert, I'm going to talk about the final bosses and then the last DLC of Godhome. The pseudo final boss is a fight against the Hollow Knight. You are not the Hollow Knight. The Hollow Knight has already contained the infection, because the Pale King made the knights from void in an attempt to try and contain the infection. So he would create a Hollow Knight with no emotion that the infection could feed off of, because the infection feeds off of emotions and like sentient thought. So he would create a Hollow Knight with no emotion, no thought of their own to contain the infection. But he was an idiot treated the Hollow Knight as a child, and so the Hollow Knight developed a kind of sense of duty to the king to try and live up to the expectation the king had for them. And this, the infection was able to feast off of and crack the vessel, the Hollow Knight, the broken, which would become imperfect vessel, and it would escape into Hallownest, and the kingdom would collapse. And so your character would return to Hallownest sometime later to try and fix this, because you are another vessel. So you can either do one of three things in the main game. You could either fight the Hollow Knight, which is one of the best boss fights in the game. I absolutely love this boss fight. It is challenging, yet fair. It is fast-paced. All of the attacks are well choreographed, while choreographed, giving you enough time to dodge them, but not too much time that it feels too easy. It is one of the best boss fights in the game. However, I thought it had to be too easy for a final boss fight, because when I went into this game, I didn't know about the Radiance. So I fought the Hollow Knight thinking it was the final boss of the game. And I even commented, it took me 5 tries to beat the Hollow Knight, and I even commented that seemed too easy. And after beating the Hollow Knight, you get the first ending of the game, where your vessel absorbs the infection into itself, becoming the new Hollow Knight, and taking the place of the old Hollow Knight. And the cycle begins anew, because we don't know if you, the player, are a pure vessel. So we don't know if you will contain the infection ad infinitum now, or if it'll be another repeat of the same thing, where there's some impurity in your supposedly void soul that allows the infection to escape. So we can also get the second ending, wherein you grab the king's mark. Yes, you get the king's brand from Hornet, or from the worm in the Kingdom's Edge. You go into the depths, you get the king's mark charm, and then you can turn that charm into void, remembering everything from your past, realizing who you are and what your purpose is, and then Hornet will join you in the middle of the boss fight. And the whole idea is Hornet stuns him so you can dream nail the Hollow Knight. But if you don't dream nail the Hollow Knight and just continue fighting him as normal, you get the second ending. So the Hollow Knight was sealed in the black egg, with the seal being created from the 3 dreamers. And the 3 dreamers were 3 individuals that the Pale King got involved in this mess, and they were asleep, and as long as they slumbered, the black seal around the black egg would remain fastened. So you go and you kill the 3 dreamers to release the black egg so you can fight the Hollow Knight. So the second ending involves, since Hornet becomes trapped in the black egg and becomes the dreamer for you as the new Hollow Knight. Basically the same thing as the first ending, except Hornet now becomes the dreamer for you. I should probably mention Hornet. People probably know this right now, but Hornet is the main boss fight for Green Path, and then you fight her again in Kingdom's Edge. Again, the same thing I have said before, an amazing redo of a boss fight in a harder way because she is faster and has new attacks. Fantastic. The second boss fight against Hornet is, again, one of my favorite boss fights in this game. There's a lot of them, but there's a lot of boss fights that I could say are one of my favorites, but that one definitely is one of them. So Hornet turns out to be your sister, kind of, because all of the vessels were created by union between the Pale King and the White Lady. And they created all of these children born of void to become the vessel. But after the Pale King determined which one would be the Hollow Knight, he consorted with Hurrah the Beast, who ruled Deep Nest, and she was like, he wanted her to become one of the dreamers for the Hollow Knight to seal the black egg. And she told him that she would only do it if he she and him bared a child. This child is Hornet, the gendered child, because Hornet is a she, whereas all of the vessels, who are the Pale King's children, do not have a gender, whereas Hornet does. So Hornet is the gendered child, your sibling. And so that kind of connection allowed her to become a dreamer for you as a dreamer for you as the new Hollow Knight. The third ending and the final ending for most of the game until Godhome DLC was released. This ending involved dream nailing the Hollow Knight when Hornet opens up the way to do so, and in doing so you enter the Hollow Knight's mind, and confront the source of the infection, the god known as the Radiance. And thus starts the actual true final boss of the base game Hollow Knight. And this is one of the best boss fights I have ever played in a video game. The Radiance is everything Elden Beast wishes it could be. A visually beautiful, difficult, yet fun final boss fight. Because everything the Radiance throws at you deals... So your health is measured in masks. Most things deal 1 mask of damage, but some attacks deal 2 masks of damage. The Radiance, all of her attacks deal 2 masks of damage. So there's difficulty in there, making it so you can only take half as many hits. And you have to heal twice in order to heal once as you would in a normal boss fight. But also her attacks are just... It becomes a bullet hell. Like the screen fills up with attacks and you have to dodge them, and specific attacks have certain ways to dodge. There's the nails that move laterally across the screen. You've got to jump through the gaps in the nails. There's the nails that come down. You've got to move into position not to get hit by them. There's the big fuck off beam of light that goes across the screen. You have to shadow dash through it. She summons these balls of light that track you down. You have to either outrun them or get them to run into the floor after a little while. And it's so good. And the music, I played a snippet of it earlier, but god damn, this is one of the best songs in the soundtrack. Anyway, the Radiance is a fantastic boss fight, and it's, like I said, Elden Beast it's in the same vein as Elden Beast, but does everything right, whereas Elden Beast got some things wrong. And that is another reason why, as to what I was saying at the start, how Hollow Knight, for me, can score higher than Elden Ring can. Because they tried to do something with the final boss. They tried to do the same thing with the final boss that From Software did, but Team Cherry succeeded where From Software fell short. So now, the last thing I want to talk about is the Godhome DLC. With the original base game, there was 100% completion. With each subsequent DLC, as they added stuff, instead of changing 100% completion, they just added over 100% completion. So, with all 4 DLCs added, there's a total of 112% completion. I, in my playthrough, got 111% by the time I stopped playing Hollow Knight and moved on to something else. The extra 12% completion comes from the different charms you can get from the Dreamers and the Lifeblood DLCs. I think fighting the Dreamers for the first time in the Dreamer DLC also adds to completion. Getting the new charms and completing the Grim Troop quest line for the Grim Troop DLC adds to that 12% completion. And then the last thing that adds to it is the 5 Pantheons of Godhome. So the last DLC, Godhome, added this completely new area called Godhome, which is just a boss rush arena. You have 5 Pantheons, Pantheon 1 through 5, simple as. And then they each, Pantheons 1 through 4, each grab a section of boss fights from like the beginning of the game to a certain point, and then from that point to another point, yada yada. And the last one goes to the end, but changes it up a bit. Not the last one, Pantheon 4 goes to the end, but changes it up a bit. So these boss fights, so all of the bosses in Godhome have 3 modes that they can be in. They can be in Attuned, which is basically just the regular boss fight. They can be in Ascended, which some of the arenas that the boss fight takes in change. Some of the attacks the bosses do change, and the bosses deal 2 masks of damage instead of 1. Or they deal double damage, because I think the bosses that natively do 2 masks do 4 masks now. So they deal double damage. And then there's Radiant, where a Radiant boss fight kills you in 1 hit and uses the Ascended arena. So Pantheons 1 through 4 use the Attuned boss fights. And as you're going through, there's some actually added boss fights that aren't in the base game. Most of them are base game boss fights. Hornet, False Champion, the Bush, Markoth, Dung Defender, Soul Master, Soul Tyrant, because they also added the Dream boss fights. But then there's some boss fights that they've added new to Godhome. So there's these Nail Masters you can find in the base game. They teach you nail arts, which are powerful attacks you can do. They added them into Godhome as bosses. And then Sly is the Great Nail Sage. They added him as a boss fight, and he's an absolute fucker. And one of my favorite additions to the game, to Godhome made, was the Pure Vessel. They basically took the Hollow Knight boss fight and was like, yeah, we don't really want to repeat that, so we're going to take him as his prime before the Pale King imprisoned him in the Black Egg. So this is the Pure Vessel, and it is such a good boss fight. It takes, again, like I've been saying so many times, it took the Hollow Knight boss fight, made him quicker, changed up his gear a little bit, because in the Hollow Knight boss fight he uses the infection as attacks. In this boss fight he doesn't have infection, so he uses void as attacks, and he uses soul. And I fucking love this boss fight, but it is so goddamn hard because he's so much faster and he deals 2 masks of damage. But he is the last challenge for Pantheon 4. And so Pantheon 5 is the reason why I have not gotten 112% completion. Because what Pantheon 5 is, it takes the attuned bosses, their kit, their damage, everything about them is all attuned, puts them in the ascended boss arenas. So most of them are unchanged. Some of them have like pitfalls, spikes, no more ground, that kind of thing. And you have to go through a boss rush from start to finish, all the bosses of Hollow Knight. From the Gruz Mother to Absolute Radiance. They took, same thing with the Hollow Knight, and changing him to the Pure Vessel, they took Radiance and changed it to Absolute Radiance. I've heard the boss fight is harder. I assume it's quicker, and I don't know if it deals more damage or not. I have never fought Absolute Radiance. The furthest I got through Pantheon 5 was Nightmare King Grim. I was 2 boss fights away from getting to Absolute Radiance. I knew I wasn't going to beat Pantheon 5 the first time I did Absolute. I knew I wasn't going to beat Absolute Radiance the first time I got to her in Pantheon 5. But holy fuck, was it annoying to get through the entire list of bosses. Get past that fucker Markoth with his ascended arena that has no goddamn floor, just to choke on Nightmare King Grim. Godhome introduced 2 new endings to the game. Both of them involve beating Pantheon 5. One of them requires you to give a white flower to the guy who sends you to Godhome. One of them requires just beating Pantheon 5, and then you have to beat Pantheon 5 after giving the flower to the guy. I'm not going to spoil what the endings are, because you can look them up online, and I haven't gotten them anyway. But I think gating content behind difficulty, if the game is intended to be difficult, is fine. Because you can beat the base game. I beat the base game. It is possible to beat Pantheon 5. It is not an impossible challenge. It is just very incredibly hard, and that is the way it should be. It is additional extra content that in no way needs to be completed. God Home has no bearing on the base game. And it gives you an extra, like a little special extra ending at the end for completing it. I want to fight Absolute Radiance. I don't know if I'm gamer enough to even make it to her. Because I don't know if I can consistently beat Nightmare King Grim and the Pure Vessel back to back. I can't even consistently beat Markoth. Alright, I'm gonna fucking vent. Markoth is an absolute bitch and one of the worst boss fights I've ever played. It is not the worst boss fight I've ever done. It is the worst boss fight in Hollow Knight. Probably. Definitely. Markoth just floats around the boss arena. You got all these platforms up in the air. Markoth floats around the boss arena. He's got this stupid flower rotating around him, and in his second phase, he gets a second flower, and he attacks you by spawning in nails and fucking launching them at you. And then in his second phase, they get faster and spawn in more often. And you know what they fucking did for his Ascended boss arena? He's one of the bosses that got a changed arena when he moved to Ascended for his Ascended boss fight. You know what Team Cherry fucking said for Markoth's Ascended boss fight? Yeah, ground is optional. So now, not only do you have to fucking dodge around his stupid nails and his flower shield and try to hit him and dodge his nails, which come out of fucking nowhere sometimes, but now you have to do it without a goddamn ground. Markoth's Ascended boss fight is one of the worst is probably the worst boss fight, if not one of, in Hollow Knight. I know the giant bush gets clowned on because it literally does nothing but charge at you, and you can beat it by standing still and just whacking it with your nail. But holy fuck, is Markoth's Ascended boss fight infuriating, especially in Pantheon 5 when I have to rush through every single boss fight without dying, and I get this motherfucker launching nails at me that I can't even see, and I have to do it all without a goddamn floor. I don't think I'm ever going to get 112% completion in Hollow Knight. And if I do, it is going to take probably a long time of doing nothing but Pantheon 5 runs. For the very reason of some of the bosses are just straight up unfair. And that is the one thing keeping Hollow Knight from being a 10 out of 10 game, is the fact that some of the boss fights, most notably the Warrior Soul boss fights, are unfair at times. Marmu is a bullshit worm boss fight. He fucking floats around the arena, rolling around, flinging himself at you, and sometimes his speed and trajectory will just randomly change after you hit him. So you get in a good rhythm of bouncing him back and forth, playing fucking tennis with this guy. And then all of a sudden he goes, whoa! Goes flying over your head and hits you from behind, and just completely pulls a 180 and hits you from behind. That is, I feel that if the Warrior Soul boss fights were not in Hollow Knight, I would happily give it a 10 out of 10 score. But that's the thing, is this game is so good that these boss fights that would probably be some of the best boss fights in other games if they were just a little less unfair are the one thing dragging it down. Okay. But that will do it for today. If you have any comments, leave it down below. If you have any suggestions for a topic you'd like me to cover, a game you want me to play, or a Warhammer topic you want me to cover, or if we could go back to the original idea of my channel, I originally wanted to do this channel to talk about scientific stuff. So if you have any science questions you want me to talk about, leave that in the comment down below. Just as I did for this game, I sometimes stream. It'll usually be in the afternoons, either after work or on a day that I don't have to work the next day. Anytime I talk about a game on this channel, I'll have streamed it earlier. So if you want, you can go find the stream VODs on the live section of this channel and just maybe pop over every now and then, check if I'm live. Whenever I plan on doing another video, I'll be streaming that game. I do have a video planned for Outer Wilds in the future. That one I have already streamed, just like Hollow Knight. These streams are in the live section of this channel. Thank you for watching, and subscribe, or I will force Team Cherry to never release Silk Song.